morning. I invite you all to join me in giving thanks this morning with hymn 1010, We Give Thanks, in the Teal Hymnal.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Those here, those joining us via live stream. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon. This is a multi-generational community where each one of us can individually learn and grow spiritually, and then together strive to build a beloved community. It's good to be with all of you today. After the service, I hope everyone will join in a social hour. If you're viewing virtually today, at the end of the service, you'll see a QR code and web link that will take you to a virtual social hour. And for people who are here, just follow the crowd on down to Fuller Hall, which is directly beneath the sanctuary. We have a few announcements this morning. First of all of our music staff and choirs are on retreat this weekend. So we're pleased to welcome our special guest musicians. Lynn Mendoza-Khan Lynn is our guest soloist today and also song leader. She's a former UU music director, most recently with the San Diego UU Church, and so is very familiar with our hymns and our style of worship. Bob Hansler is our keyboardist today. There's Bob. Bob has a long history in liturgical music, mostly in Episcopal churches on the East Coast, so thank you both for being with us today. We appreciate it. Everyone is invited to join the finish line celebration for UU the Vote in our Buchanan Reception Hall starting at noon today. We are not only nearing the goal of 10,000 letters to underrepresented voters in North Carolina, Dana tells me this morning, wherever you are, that we're actually going to exceed 10,000 letters. That's just fabulous work. That's the work of the congregation. So thank you to everybody who's participated in that. Yeah, for sure. I also understand that over in Buchanan, there will be some light lunch and snacky foods and a UU the Vote cake. So at noon, head on over to Buchanan and join in that final effort. On Tuesday, October 25th, so just this Tuesday, there will be a Zoom presentation at 6:30 in the evening entitled Voting Our Values, 2022 Ballot Measures. And this is going to be a chance to learn about state, county, and Portland ballot measures that are being supported by First Unitarian's various social justice action groups. And it should be a really good meeting. I'd encourage you to register. You can find that information in this week's Front Steps e-News. And then lastly today, I don't know if you've ever wondered about how our labyrinth of rooms and buildings are all interconnected here at First Unitarian. If so, you can join a 30-minute walking tour of our campus today after the service. You can just meet up with Bill Cunningham. Some of you can see him. He's waving his hand over there. Bill will be in the lobby just right outside the sanctuary. He'll be holding up a church tour sign. So if you're interested in just seeing a little bit more of the campus, please join Bill after the service. And now let's take a moment to greet one another. If you're online and have a chat option, I'd invite you to use that. And otherwise, say hello to your neighbors. Reverend Tom will light our chalice this morning. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
Thank you, Lynn. Words of poet Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Come now, good people, and let us enter into worship together. I invite you to join in a hymn, Immortal Love. In our responsive reading, it's by Billy Collins, entitled, But It Is Hard. But it is hard to speak of these things, how the voices of light enter the body and begin to recite their stories, how the earth holds us painfully against its breast made of humus and brambles, how we who soon be gone regard the entities that continue to return greener than ever. Spring water flowing through a meadow and the shadows of clouds passing over the hills, and the ground where we stand in the tremble of thought, taking the vast outside into ourselves. Let's sing together our doxology now, Spirit of Life. Please be seated. And now, as part of our season of giving, we have a testimony from Ryan Dybert.
Hello, friends and members of First Unitarian of Portland. My name is Ryan Dybert, and I'm grateful to serve this year as the moderator of your Board of Trustees. Sorry that I'm not able to be there in person with you today in the sanctuary this Sunday. Like many of us, though, I'll be coming to church online this week, likely by watching later in the week, well after the sanctuary empties today. For me, at least, that still feels like a new and strange development from the pandemic, and I know that many of us are still figuring out what it means to be in community in a continuing and maybe even increasingly hybrid world. In the midst of that, I'm deeply appreciating our dedicated and dynamic staff and worship teams who help produce an extraordinarily high-quality, fully hybrid online and in-person service every week. And that allows us to participate in this growing, changing, and thriving community from our retirement communities and living rooms throughout the Portland area to literally all across the world. That's a hello to you, Leah, and family all the way in Costa Rica. Some of you may know that our Board of Trustees begins every monthly board meeting with a meal together and then a focused time of spiritual deepening, usually in reflective conversation led by our ministers. In our last meeting, we reflected on this month's spiritual theme of commitment and specifically what each of us felt committed to in our service to First Unitarian. The answers, of course, were varied, heartfelt, and inspiring. And I was struck by a particular thread that carried through many of them. Several spoke to a sense of commitment to stewarding this church in this brief moment that we have, with deep appreciation to our spiritual ancestors and the community leaders who built this church more than a century ago, and with a faithful hope in the church that is yet to become. That surfaced especially in our commitment to our learning communities that support our children, youth, and young adults. I mean, I came here looking for a nurturing community that could help to support my spiritually curious and question-filled children, but I stayed as a mid-career do-gooder who found spiritual sustenance in justice-seeking community. And now I serve equally for all of us in community here and now, and for the congregations that are yet to come and that I may never know. In this season of giving, when we make our financial commitments to support the church, I do so knowing that our support today stewards the church that we have inherited and now made our own, but that it also makes possible the church that is yet to become and will surely be needed long after we're gone. I hope that you will join in joyful commitment and give generously as you're able. I'm very glad to be in community with all of you, even in this weird and hybrid way today. I'll see you in the sanctuary and more Zoom rooms soon.
So as Ryan mentioned in his video, we are in the season of giving, and we hope that you received your pledge packet in the mail this week. If you've been around the church for a while, you should have had a personalized one. If you haven't received it, you're welcome. We have a season of giving table out in the lobby, and you're welcome to pick up a pledge form there. And we're, of course, heading to November 13th, Celebration Sunday. For this church year, we are sharing our monthly offerings to organizations that are either led by youth and or committed to developing youth leadership. For the month of October, we're sharing our plate with ELSO, which, as you see, says Experience Life Science Outdoors. Their mission is to teach about science and technology, engineering, arts, math, as well as nature-based education through the lens of stories and lived experiences of Black and Brown communities. If you'd like to give to the offering today, you'll see a slide in just a moment that will show you the many ways that you can make a gift, and our online viewers can use a QR code or web link that they'll see in just a moment. For people here, if you see a yellow card near you, you can use that QR code to make a donation, or if you'd prefer giving a cash or check in person, you can find an usher with a basket in the lobby after the service who would be very happy to accept your gift. Thanks so much for supporting the work of the church and our community partners. Each week we make space in our service to name the concerns of our community life. We are a caring community, and pastoral support happens through our ministers and through our lay ministers who hold our prayers throughout the week. If you're here in person, you can light a candle in either one of our side galleries and write down your prayer intention. And those online can email prayer intentions to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. If you have a joy or concern that you would actually like spoken in the service and included in our weekly e-news, you can email that to parishconcerns@firstunitarianportland.org. We have one individual concern to name today. Congregant Joe Worth asks for prayers for his sister Seal, who lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Seal fell and sustained a bad head injury and was in serious condition, but is home now and will be undergoing therapy. So our thoughts and prayers go to Joe and Seal. We also hold in love and care all of those joys and sorrows which remain quietly in our hearts. Next Sunday will be our annual All Souls service, which includes a sung litany of those in our community who have died in the last year. If you would like the name of a family member or a close loved one sung in that service, please email the name to, where are we mailing it to? Oh, Remembrance. There are a lot of different ways to spell it, and we have it all set up on the website to accept all spelling, but it's to remembrance@firstunitarianportland.org. And the deadline for those names is this Tuesday, so October 25th. So again, that's remembrance@firstunitarianportland.org, and we need to have those names by this Tuesday. This morning, there are many beautiful flowers on the chancel. The farther two are from a memorial service that was held at our church yesterday for Jeremy Dirks. He was an 18-year-old who died on September 11th. We're also very blessed with beautiful flowers given by the Weller-Fields family in honor of Diwali, which is the Hindu festival of lights. So thank you, Sarana and Frank. They are very lovely. Will you pray with me? Oh, sweet Spirit, here we are again. Thank goodness for Sundays when we give ourselves permission to chance a bit of respite, just an hour, just for us. Who can begrudge that? Yes, the world's still out there. Things don't look too great. But here on a Sunday, we look around and see that we're not alone. Companions for this journey abound, and our forlorn spirits are encouraged once again. Diwali dawns tomorrow, the brilliant festival of lights, triumph over darkness, but also a symbol of goodness over evil, and we sure need more of that. No one has to tell us that these are troubling times. So everyone, every one of us, alone and together, must assail that evil as we're able when we meet it. We come on Sunday, allies all, and see the work that we must do. But first, sweet Spirit, let us sing some hymns, greet our neighbors, and breathe in this church's all-pervasive love. Amen. Let's take a few moments to be together for a time of quiet. Please remain seated as we sing our hymn, We Are Not Our Own. Our reading today is by Carl Dennis, entitled Candles. If on your grandmother's birthday you burn a candle to honor her memory, you might think of burning an extra to honor the memory of someone who never met her, a man who may have come to the town she lived in looking for work and never found it. Picture him taking a stroll one morning after a month of grief with the want ads to refresh himself in the park before moving on. Suppose he notices on the gravel path the shards of a green glass bottle that your grandmother, then still a girl, will be destined to step on when she wanders barefoot away from her school picnic if he doesn't stoop down and scoop the mess up with a want ad section and carry it to a trash can. For you to burn a candle for him, you needn't suppose the cut would be a deep one, just deep enough to keep her at home the night of the hayride when she meets Helen, who is soon to become her dearest friend, and whose brother George, 30 years later, helps your grandfather with a loan so his shoe store doesn't go under in the Great Depression, and his son, your father, is able to stay in school where his love of learning is fanned into flames, a love he labors later to kindle in you. How grateful you are for your father's efforts is shown by the candles you've burned for him. But today, for a change, why not a candle for the man whose name is unknown to you? Take a moment to wonder whether he died at home with friends and family, or alone on the road, on the lookout for no one to sit at his bedside and hold his hand, the very hand it's time for you to imagine holding.
Hello? You should be able to hear me. I come to you this morning with a poem that has been set to music by Samuel Barber. The poet is James Adjie, and it is titled Sure on This Shining Night. And in this poem, it's from the perspective of someone who's older, looking back upon life and feeling all of the joys, but also those little ouch moments along the journey, and wondering, contemplating, reflecting upon what that life means, and whether it was all okay, whether we're all okay. And I bring this to you this morning to reflect, for you to do your own reflection and also healing. Because wherever we are on our journey, it's okay.
you, Lynn. Each of us has a story about how we came to be, about who our family is, about what our life is all about. But how do we tell that story? What are the parts that we include, but also the parts that we don't choose to include? Who are the people we include, and who do we leave out? And how, if at all, does that story change over time? One of the privileges I have as a minister is to officiate at memorial services. And more often than not, as people talk after the service, you'll hear something to the effect of, I had no idea, fill in the blank here, I had no idea they did this or that. I had no idea that was part of their story. Yes, each of us has a story. It's a narrative that begins early on in the things we're probably told about ourselves. Our story is shaped even before we're the ones telling it. For some of us, that narrative might be that we, well, in essence, are the center of the universe. We may be the hero of our story. But for others, it may be something closer to the opposite of that. We see our own stories as anything but precious, and we may not see our own story as being worthy at all. We may see our lives by the parts that are broken and hidden from sight that we may want to forget. Maybe the best way to survive is just to try to forget. What we say and what we don't say can tell a lot about how we see ourselves in relation to the world, how we see possibility or maybe the lack of possibility for ourselves, how we see ourselves as whole or not whole at all. And no matter the particulars, seeing with much perspective can be hard because, well, what's closer than our very own story? The truth is, how we tell our stories is very personal and very close, and all that can make it hard to imagine ourselves perhaps telling that story in a different way. Truth is, sometimes we may get kind of stuck in the story that we tell, how it is that we see our lives. But sometimes it may be that the version we have really isn't serving us all that well at all. Sometimes we may need, in fact, to have a new version of that story we tell. But sometimes imagining that story, well, it may be harder than we think. Let me tell you an example from my own life. A defining event in my own life was my father's death when I was 7 years old. He died suddenly and it pretty much turned my world upside down. And the story that I came to have from that time was not necessarily helpful at all. Now, lots of well-intentioned people talked about how good it was that I was there to take care of my mother and that I was now the man of the house. And in the midst of that loss at that tender age of 7, well, all that was pretty confusing, if I'm honest. And for many years, my own narrative of that time, of that event, was that I just hadn't really handled it all that well, that somehow I should have managed to handle it better. What happened for me is the story kind of froze there. It would be a long time before I was able to grieve that loss. So years go by, life goes on, I'm in my early 30s, and my mother dies. All of a sudden, I find myself not only grieving her, but somehow my father as well. Suddenly, all that old grief starts coming right up to the surface. Well, it happened that at the time I was teaching first and second graders in the Sunday school at my local church. Kids who were 7 and 8 years old, the same age I was when my father died. And one Sunday, a proverbial light bulb goes off, suddenly I saw my younger self in these kids in my class. And suddenly seeing them in their own innocence, I had a whole new perspective on that loss of my own father all those years before. That I was a child when that happened, and not somehow an adult child who should have handled the whole situation better. It was that perspective that helped me get a place of more acceptance and forgiveness than I had been able to find before. Suddenly, I found myself telling a very different version of my own story. Sometimes life, and in my own case, a good therapist, offers us an opportunity to change our story, or at least to enlarge it. Maybe it's about time, maybe it's about perspective, maybe it's about intention, and perhaps sometimes it's about some grace. But the good news is that sometimes we can find a different or more expansive story than the one we've had that can offer us healing and maybe even a degree of hope. Sometimes it may be the need to reclaim part of or maybe all of the story that has been taken from us. Sometimes it may be that we need to reclaim some parts of our story that have been hidden in the shadows and need to come out. It's a kind of bearing witness to ourselves and to those around us, a kind of reimagining and retelling that may offer new perspectives and new insights. It may be telling the story from mostly something that's one-dimensional and making it something that's multi-dimensional. It's being able to see the stories of our lives as living things that can change and that can grow. Sometimes stories that we can be seen through a wholly different lens. Sometimes those stories are about us, sometimes they're about our families, but sometimes they're about our communities too. And sometimes it's important to look past maybe just what seems to be the single dimension of what any story can be. In a popular TED Talk, Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie talks about the danger of limiting our stories too much. Her talk is entitled "The Danger of the Single Story." She says the single story is what you get when you compress all the complex stories of individuals or groups into a single, often oversimplified narrative. Told enough times, such stories get internalized, and we forget that they're merely stories. She talks about her growing up in Nigeria and how the books she would read as a child were all written by English and American writers, and how when she started writing her own stories, her characters and stories were a lot like those characters in those books she had read and the places. How her characters were all white and blue-eyed, how they played in the snow, and how they ate apples. Years later, when she read African writers and she talked about how a door was opened for her by those stories. In her words, "I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about the things that I recognized." But still, she talks about how easy it is for us to have a single narrative of someone. Her words again, "I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor, my mother was an administrator, and so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help, who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide and his family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit, and his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Andice eventually came to school here in America, and in the talk she gives several examples of where she, an African woman living in America, became the pitiable object of a single story. She talks about her American roommate shocked by her, how she asked where Andice had learned to speak English so well, and was confused when Andice said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. The roommate asked if she could listen to what she called Andice's tribal music, and was consequently very disappointed when Andice produced her tape of Mariah Carey. Again, Andice's words, "What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals." I was struck listening to her talk of just how easily it is to tell a single story. It's easier than having to listen for the more complex story. And as I have to note, and perhaps especially in the polarizing times that we are in, how much easier it is for that single story can be. How it's hard to see the humanity in others amid all the rancor and division of these days. All too often, the single story we default to isn't helpful and may actually be harmful. How life is so much more beautiful and complex than we may first want to believe. As I find myself saying a lot these days, we do live in complicated times. That complication has many faces, but it includes how difficult it can be to get some sense of what is real. Too often in these days, of fake news and alternative narratives, we may be left feeling isolated and alone. Perhaps it's in that very moment that asks us to have a degree of humility about the stories we are telling, the stories we are hearing, the stories we are assuming, the stories that perpetuate those narratives that we have come to hold. In the poem that Catherine read earlier about the reimagined other path the writer's life and the lives of their parents may have taken, every time I read that poem, I find myself weeping. And I think it may be because it gets at some deeper truth for me. And that is the knowing that there is so much we can know, but so much we cannot know. Like all the ways that life for us and for our ancestors could have been different, for good or for ill. How this life we know is about us, but also so much about something larger. Some mystery we can only know so much about. How inherent in it all is so much that we really can never fully know. How we recognize over and over again just how interconnected, just how interdependent our lives really are. or in the words of the hymn we sang a little while ago, we are not our own. Earth forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. Our spiritual theme this month is commitment. Commitment. So, what are the commitments we make to ourselves and to others, to the communities of which we are a part? What are the commitments we make to this larger world? How is it that we tell our stories? Who's in and who's out? What might be some larger version of that story? Perhaps in the midst of this complex world, we're asked to first make a commitment to live with open hearts and minds about how the stories we come to tell or hear or believe are living, breathing, multi-dimensional stories. That might be a commitment to ourselves when it comes to our own stories as well. It may be the stories of our families. It may be the stories of our communities, how we shape those stories and how those stories shape us. How we're asked to imagine how there might be a different story, or at least another version of the story that helps us see and know the world through a wider lens, one that takes in, or at least tries to take in, the wonderful and complicated and confusing world we live in. For those of us who have known places of privilege, that includes a willingness to get out of our comfort zones and at least be willing to name and recognize those places of privilege as a starting point. That alone may be an important step on the journey. Perhaps the spiritual task is making a practice of noticing not only the story and who's in it, but to also recognize, or at least try to imagine, who's in it, who's not in it, and why. Or to pay attention to the larger story that's there in front of us, but maybe we just haven't been paying enough attention to. To imagine how our lives might be different, to imagine some new version of those stories we embody. Words of the poet Jane Hirshfield. Some stories last many centuries, others only a moment. All alter that lifetime like beach glass, grow distant and more beautiful with salt. Yet even today, to look at a tree and to ask the story, "Who are you?" is to be transformed. There is a stage in us where each being, each thing is a mirror. Then the bees of self pour from the hive door, ravenous to enter the sweetness of flowering nettles and thistle. Next comes the ringing a stone or violin or empty bucket gives off, the immeasurable's continuous singing before it goes back into story and feeling. In Borneo, there are palm trees that walk on their high roots. Slowly with effort, they lift one leg and then another. I would like to join that stilted transmigration, to feel my own skin vertical as theirs, an ant road, a highway for beetles. I would like, not minding whatever travels my heart, to follow it all the way into leaf form, bark furl, root touch, and then keep walking unimaginably further. As our stories unfold day by day by day, season by season, may we tell them with open hearts, with open minds, with all of their power and with all of their promise. And may they help us imagine a world where transformation, where liberation is possible. Amen. Will you say a prayer with me now? Spirit of life, God of many names and of no name, hear our prayers. Hear our stories. Help us to imagine. Help us to envision. Help us to live in such a way that we might stay present to this beautiful and complex and unfolding creation in our living, in our telling. May we make it so. Amen. Let's join now in our closing hymn, We Would Be One. In our living, in our storytelling, may we tell the story of how we are one, and may it be a story of love and how that love and hope are possible. And may our stories carry us to places we can never even imagine. This is the day we've been given. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace. Practice love. Amen.